There was a time when being watched felt temporary. Then it became normal. Cameras are everywhere. On empty street corners at midnight, along the ceilings of bright white hallways, mounted on lampposts, in parking lots, schoolyards, airports. They didn't arrive all at once. There were no announcements, no defining moment. They simply appeared. At first, people noticed. Some looked up, hesitated for a second. Some turned away, a brief flicker of discomfort passing through them. But the next day, everything went on as usual. No one was called in. No one disappeared. Nothing terrible happened, at least not right away. And so people learned something very simple. If there are no immediate consequences, there is no reason to stop. More cameras were installed, in places that never needed them. In places once considered private, no one protested, not because they didn't care, but because life had to go on. Morning still meant work. Children still went to school, planes still took off on time. And in that constant motion, the presence of cameras became a small detail, too small to pause for, too familiar to question. No one asked, because questions require energy, they require time. They require a sense of urgency, and by then, society was already exhausted. Exhausted by fear, exhausted by constant warnings, exhausted by the need to stay alert. And when people are tired for long enough, they stop asking why. They learn to live with it. They walk faster under the lights. They speak less in public. They grow used to the feeling of being watched, even when they don't know by whom. Not because people agreed, but because they adjusted. Some sentences stopped being spoken. Not because they were forbidden. There was no list. No document spelling them out. No notice posted on a wall. They simply became unnecessary. Jokes that once felt harmless. Questions that used to come naturally. Opinions that never required much thought. They didn't disappear overnight. They slowed down. People began to pause mid-sentence, to weigh their words before continuing, to wonder, should this be said at all? Some actions stopped as well, not because anyone banned them, not because a new law was announced, but because a vague feeling surfaced, a feeling without a name, yet strong enough to make people hesitate. The feeling of being watched, not directly, not right now, but somewhere later. People began adjusting the smallest behaviors, walking a little faster under cameras, avoiding staying too long on a street corner, not lingering in places that once felt familiar. No one asked them to do this. No one reminded them, yet they did it anyway. Because in their minds, another script had already been written. What if someone is watching? What if this moment is misunderstood? What if this action is seen again in a different context? No answers were needed. The presence of the question was enough. Not because of law, but because of feeling. The feeling that freedom was no longer invisible. It had edges. It had conditions. And sometimes, it had a price. People no longer needed reminders. They reminded themselves. They adjusted their tone, chose safer words, avoided unnecessary topics, not because their beliefs had changed, but because they learned how to survive in a new environment. An environment where silence felt safer than debate, where blending in felt easier than standing out, where doing nothing became the wiser choice. Gradually, actions that were once instinctive had to pass through an invisible filter. No one could see the filter, but everyone could feel it. And the most unsettling part, no one could remember exactly when they started censoring themselves. There was no defining moment. No date circled on a calendar. Just countless choices to stay quiet, until quiet became habit. No one told them to stop. They stopped on their own. Children grow up thinking cameras are normal. They don't remember when cameras appeared, because from the moment they opened their eyes, cameras were already there. On classroom ceilings, in hallway corners, on streetlight poles, in parking lots, in shopping centers, in airports, train stations, elevators. There's no before for them to compare. To them, being seen is not unusual. Not being seen is what feels strange. They learn to grow up inside the frame. They learn where to stand, which lane to walk in, how to behave as if someone is always watching. Not out of fear, but because that is how the world works. When adults talk about privacy, children don't argue. They simply don't understand. What is privacy when every space has an angle? What is privacy when every action leaves a trace? They don't feel like something was taken from them, because they never had it to begin with. At school, they are taught that cameras are for protection. Protection from danger. Protection from bad people. Protection from mistakes. No one says that cameras also record the smallest moments. The seconds of standing still too long. A glance held in the wrong direction. A gesture that doesn't fit the pattern. But children don't question it. Because to them, this is just the background of the world, like walls, like floors, like classroom ceilings. They don't learn how to hide, they learn how to fit. Without being told, they already know what to do, what not to do. What is safe? They don't call it self-control. They call it good behavior. And when they grow up, they carry that habit into adult life. No new laws needed. No warnings required. Just one familiar feeling. Someone is always watching. But the most frightening thing is not the cameras. It's the gap in memory. The empty space where there should have been a concept called privacy. No one took it away. There was no debate, no protest. Because to protest, people have to know what they're losing. And this generation doesn't. To them, privacy is not a right, not a choice, not something to be protected. It's just an old story adults sometimes mention with a nostalgic tone. Privacy wasn't taken. It was never introduced. Less chaos. Streets are more orderly. Lines are straighter. Everything has a process, a rhythm, a sense of control. There are fewer unpredictable moments. Fewer instances that make people flinch. Life moves forward evenly, like a carefully lubricated machine. Less surprise. No one really likes surprises. Surprises carry risk. And risk is something the society has learned to avoid. Rough edges are smoothed out. Deviant behaviors are adjusted. Differences are gently corrected. Then they disappear. People feel safer, less guarded, less anxious about what tomorrow might bring. Stability becomes the highest value. No one is forced into silence. No one is ordered to comply. Everything happens quietly. So quietly that people no longer notice when they began to change. Not because they were pressured, but because it felt easier not to be different. Society runs smoothly when everyone understands the limits. When no one steps too far outside them. When every action is predictable. But at the same time, something else slowly fades away. Without noise, without resistance. Unconscious actions. Choices made without calculation. Moments when people do something simply because they want to. People start thinking before they step. Weighing words before they speak. Asking themselves before they act. Not out of fear of consequences, but out of habit. The society becomes safer. More predictable, softer, but also with less instinctive freedom. When people behave. Not because they're forced, but because they're watched. Who is really in control?